I guess I can provide a bit of background of my center. So at the University of Queensland, we combine several different faculties and schools, and we invested a sum of money for funds to seed interdisciplinary research, and the goal is basically to bring people together, and some of the incentives of researchers is you put some funding there, people will come together. So that's been my job for the last 5 years, and relatively it has been working. And the context of why UQ is doing this is mainly because besides the traditional research and teaching capabilities which you see on the screen, we have AllCert, which is the world's second oldest computer emergency response team. So we have 600 plus members from AllCert that can actually provide, together with the IT services department and all our different partners, provide real world research challenges to us. And then with 60 over academics in the center and their respective groups and labs, we're able to translate that into teaching. One of the radical things that we did in the Master of Cybersecurity course that we developed and introduced in 2019 was to accept students from any discipline. It is harder to teach this kind of classes, I must admit, but it was worth it. When you see the cohort having different people from different backgrounds, from journalism, from policy studies, from computer science, all coming together to form cohorts, it was pretty cool. And we have 4 specializations: cyber defense, criminology, leadership, and cryptography. So, sorry, shameless pitch, but this is something that we are very proud of. In terms of underline of interdisciplinary work, I have to acknowledge my team: Lorraine, John, Himing, Cheng, and Kimberly for their hard work of what I'm going to present. And some of the selected slides are actually from Himing and Cheng. They work really hard, so I want to put it on record that I really appreciate their hard work. I was quite reticent initially to put in this slide, but I think I have to put this slide out to differentiate the 2 boxes in the middle. When we talk about cybercrime, one is the cyber-focused or cyber-dependent crimes, and then we have the cyber-enabled crimes. Because when we use the definition of cybercrimes, when we use cybercrime as a word, we mean different things when we come from different backgrounds. So I just want to put it out here. And the cyber-focused crimes are what, in this talk and in this session, we're talking about compromising the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the technical computer infrastructure, say data breaches, hacking, ransomware. And then we have cyber-enabled crimes, using technology to amplify traditional crimes. So I just want to set that scene because in the next slide, I'm going to talk about how we look at it differently. So as I mentioned, we talk about cybersecurity or computer science researchers traditionally when we look at how to prevent or stop cybercrime. We look at the confidentiality, integrity, and availability challenges. But very few of us actually consider the other aspects of how do we stop crime. On the other hand, we have criminologists who are looking at, how does the crime develop, how can we prevent crime, and so on, but without really looking into the technical aspects. So this is where we really have to look at the people, process, and technology. Currently, there's a lack of focus on people and process. We surveyed about 352 crime prevention, cybercrime prevention papers in literature, in computer science, and we only found 4% of these computer scientists actually looking into criminology theory. So there is room for growth and improvement. We believe that, currently they're not really familiar with criminology, so we decided to set out to actually look into traditional criminology theory and see if they can be applied into preventing cybercrime. Why prevention? You think about, say, firefighting. When we constantly have a lot of fires, we don't prevent the fire from happening in the first place. Ultimately, the first responders will be burnout and the scale of the incidents will go out of control. So we believe that prevention is always better than cure, and this is why we are focusing a lot on this, so that everyone's jobs here get easier over the years. One of the criminology theory that is constantly used and has been effectively used across the world is the situational crime prevention theory. So can I just have a quick show of hands if you know about this prior to this presentation? Wonderful. So it's about 50%. I wouldn't go into the details then, and if the slides will be shared, then please refer to them after this seminar. So the main gist of this is that there are 5 families to prevent crime, and it is based in intervening with the environment of the crime, where the crime happens. In this case, our environment is very virtual and it's global sometimes, and it's always fast moving. But we believe that when there's an environment and we can do interventions, we'll be able to do some of these things like increasing the effort for the criminal, increasing the risks for the criminals, reducing the rewards, reducing provocations, and removing excuses. So in these 5 broad categories, we have 25 techniques under them. The theory comes from these 3 backgrounds: rational choice, perspective, routine activity approach, crime pattern theory. As a computer scientist, I'm not an expert in this. I did read about it for 2 years, in 2017 to 2019, before I was able to confidently talk about it. And also, when we were discussing situational crime prevention, we look at its evolution, and we also see that it was influenced by Richard Whatley's situational precipitators. So this is the history of how this was developed. I'll explain why this made sense for the cyber context. The rational choice perspective focused on the fact that offenders adopt reasoned decision-making processes when committing crime. So there is efforts versus risk and rewards. Routine activity theory approach looks at 3 factors: the offender, the target, and probably the absence of a guardian. We did a paper on cyberplace managers as guardians. So basically, chief information security officers or cybersecurity managers in organizations. And we were able to prove empirically that they tend to be able to increase the resilience of organizations with a named role in the organization. Crime pattern theory as well, observations on human behaviors, regularities on across space and time. So all this is the background, and it's basically focused on a few key principles. The reason I have to show you this is because the rest of my presentation is based on SCP. They are very good principles for us. From a computer scientist, when I came across this, I was like, oh wow, this is really expanding my horizons, because all we were talking about is stronger firewalls, stronger cryptography techniques, or better intrusion detection mechanisms, but we're not looking at it from this way, right? So focusing on the crime category, specific ones, and concentrating on the bang for buck, understanding how it's committed, and using an action research model, and then a variety of solutions. So when we look at it and map at the current practice of cybersecurity, we could see that in red font, there are only 3 techniques that cybersecurity professionals are using in the SCP framework. So for a researcher, this is great, because then I have 22 more to work on, right? So, but you can see that, for example, when we talk about hardening targets, like making software patches, making cryptography harder for people to crack, it's just all based on increasing the effort of the criminal. But we're not looking at reducing the rewards or reducing the provocation and other things. And so from a real-life macro-level example of SCP, I'd like to bring 2 incidents that we have talked about. Even the Attorney General has mentioned it just now. The Medibank case, where the hacker was identified, thanks to the good work of some of the colleagues here, and also the hacker for Optus attack. When we identify them, we increase the risk of subsequent offenders. We reduce the rewards, right? The Optus one came and apologized, right, in media. We remove the excuses. So we shine the spotlight literally on these criminals. And this is a wonderful attempt. Instead of just constantly, passively reacting, we are now proactively going towards the prevention of crime. So can we map all this into cybersecurity techniques? This is our next question, right? So there's a lot of techniques in cybersecurity. Yes, the answer is yes. There are definitely examples. If we look at the 5 families of SCPs from A to E, and you can see the list of examples here. For example, increasing the effort, you have firewalls. Increasing the risks, you have IDS, intrusion detection systems, and so on, and reducing the rewards, making it, disrupting the markets, which is fantastic work by law enforcement now. Clean desk policy within organizations, reducing provocation. A pleasant working environment actually reduces the likelihood of people making mistakes within the organization, removing excuses or internal self-justifications. So we look at the issues with the SCP research in cybercrime as well. We can't find any. We tried our best to scour through the literature, and we were unable to identify many of these techniques being deployed. But we also found that, for example, there is the ISO IEC 27000 series, which had a very 93 controls, 93 things you can do to secure, from a cybersecurity perspective, your organization. So we thought, okay, that's a wonderful list, like a checklist for us. And then we decided to create a framework on how to apply such frameworks or standards. So we came up with an SCP C-cube cycle. As you can see by now, computer scientists love to invent acronyms. So we have started to propose that. We focus on the specific crime. So in this case, we are focusing on ransomware and sometimes business email compromise, which are the top 2 for organizations. And then we want to comprehend how we can apply these interventions into the crime, and then applying the controls from the ISO standards or other standards. So we want to create this inventory of a plug-and-play mechanism so that criminologists do not have to be computer science experts, and computer scientists do not have to be criminologists. So we come to a middle point where we create a bridge for both sides to be able to work together. So this is shown in an example of the ISO 27002 standard, which shows the list of controls. There are 93 of them, so I'm not going to list every one of them, but I'm going to give you a quick animation to run through how we categorize them later. We also categorize them into people, organizational, technology, and so on. It has to be said that this is not the only way. It is the first demonstrable way. So we can do it for example, from the cybersecurity professionals' point of view, we have NIST cybersecurity framework from the US, or the MITRE frameworks, attack and defend frameworks, or even the SMB 1001, which I co-authored with some of my colleagues. So let's look at how we can implement some of these. So from the ISO standards, we were able to see that when we look at the business process of a ransomware attack from the left to the right, where the victim, so when you see from the dotted line, the horizontal dotted line saying entity 1, that's the organization, anything above that, and then we have law enforcement. So step A, they receive the ransomware, the material, and then after that they will read and access the material, which was highlighted by Bella just now, and then they click on the material, and then the malware will encrypt the download and encrypt the information, and then there's the payment stages. At each step, we identified that there are opportunities for us to actually make it harder for the ransomware gangs to impact users. So we say that if we were to do increasing efforts in just before step A, for example, we will be able to do more. And then we could do this for the entire workflow. But this is just one process. And then we started to research into, are we able to have a methodology to look into organizational processes and then identify where crime is likely to happen or cybercrime is likely to happen. And then those process owners will be able to introduce interventions into those process steps. So basically doing a modification. And in the 1980s, there was this term called business process re-engineering, which was very popular in the information systems discipline. We wanted to do that. So we decided to do it anyway. These are the 93 controls. This is not an eyesight test. I'm just scrolling through this to let you see and also to give credit to the hard work of my team, mapping everything, right, to the situational crime prevention categories and strategies. So we were able to map them into a framework. We were able to look into how to do it from both sides, from the criminology lens and from the computer science lens. And then we initially, before we went into the wild, so to speak, into the industry, we looked into some of the ransomware incidents that were publicly announced and details were published. So in Singapore, we have the Personal Data Protection Act, and there's a commission to manage the act, and the PDPC is a commission. They recently fined, in 2023, a company which is a car financing and car loans company, 82,000 Singapore dollars. And the background of this is that 141,000 individuals had their personal data leaked. And some of these findings were saying that they had installed outdated software which allowed third-party access. And as you can see, this is still very much from a technical point of view. They say that this is, they violated the section of the Act which says the failure to conduct regular monitoring of software patches and the failure to implement processes to manage the upgrades or to use multi-factor authentication. And then notably, they also say that the company assumed that its IT vendor will monitor the software patches. So they say that because of this learning, now organizations should or must contractually require IT vendors to conduct regular monitoring. So you can see the language here used is very technical focus, but you can see the glimpses now with the introduction and the lecture at 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon. The glimpses of SCP lenses looking into this, right? So this is what we did. We looked at the processes, and then we started to identify crime opportunities, and we wanted to prevent these crime opportunities based on that use case that we just seen. So for example, the vendor performing the patch or having ways to prevent the stolen passwords from being used as an authentication, so like multi-factor authentication. In a nutshell, this is what we did. We were able to look into the interventions, into the techniques, and right now we were able to see that, if we look at it from a criminology lens, using the SCP framework as a potential application of criminology studies into cybercrime, we're able to re-engineer business processes to make things better, to basically prevent cybercrime. Okay, and just this effort alone can save organizations tens of thousands of dollars. Okay, so right now we are working with a manufacturer. We discovered a lot of things with manufacturers. For example, they have machines with shared passwords. They have very interesting ways of updating their software. And we are working with an enterprise software company that looks into procurement, HR processes, and supplying into governments and so on. And we're looking at where the interventions can take place using SCP and what's the efficacy of the intervention. That's the bulk of my PhD's work, Cheng's work. And we're applying it into not just the Australian context, we have collaborators in Abu Dhabi and Dubai who's applying into the financial sector in the Middle East. And also we are looking into vignette studies to actually look into business process reengineering. So we're looking for more collaborators. We would be happy to work with you, if you have use cases to work with us, or even if you want to contribute to some of our techniques and you can say, hey, look, Ryan, or other computer scientists, there's another criminology theory that you could consider as a tool. Please do so. Okay, it doesn't have to be me, it can be any computer scientist. So these are some of the references. We reference about 60-something references in this talk, but I'm just going to point the three main papers that we developed based on these references and our research. And thank you, and thanks to AIC and Anthony and Chad for the invitation.